Autopsy, also known as The Victim, came out in winter of 1975, so it must have been made in the summer of the previous year, because the film takes place, the story revolves around a chain of suicide which happened in the heat of in the summer in Rome. So it must have been made in July or August in 1974, and it came out in Italy 2 or 3 months before Dario Argento's Deep Red. So we're talking 1975, when the giallo genre has peaked and was about to start going into decline, and in the following years the films that would come out would be more like stragglers or over-the-top sleaze fests, and Argento himself would for a time forsake giallo and move on to more supernatural horror. The director Armando Crispino is one of those filmmakers who have only made a couple of thrillers, but such special ones that they are remembered for those films, just like Aldo Lado has made just a couple of thrillers, or Antonio Bido. So the other giallo made by Crispino is The Etruscan Kills Again. The Etruscan Kills Again is a more conventional one. It's a bit more in the footsteps of traditional murder mystery, and perhaps even somewhat of an Edgar Wallace influenced film, because there was some German money in The Etruscan Kills Again. When it comes to Autopsy, it's a brilliant example of how to stay faithful to the murder mystery structure, and yet deliver a film which, while definitely indebted to Argento, it nevertheless has its own legs to stand on, which is a magnificent achievement. I prefer Autopsy to The Etruscan Kills Again, although both films have a very different style, and they are just very different films. It's difficult to compare them. Autopsy is one of those very special films which they definitely leave an impression. So there is the aesthetic which somehow manages to help gloss over the story's shortcomings in some ways. Autopsy stars Mimsy Farmer and Ray Lovelock as this impossibly handsome couple. They both look like models, and they were quite young when they made the film, so there are obligatory nudity scenes with them, which are filmed quite tastefully, and they just very photogenic. So the interesting thing about Autopsy is how sex drive is really incorporated into storytelling. So Mimsy Farmer is Simone. She's this very interesting character, because she's, on the one hand side, she's fragile, and she's obviously tormented by these visions. Now, this trope of a female lead having visions is a very frequently occurring one in the giallo. We just have to think about Florinda Balkan's visions in Lizard and Woman's Skin, or what Anita Strindberg experiences in Tropic of Cancer. And there are flashbacks. We have Edwige Fenech. She experiences flashbacks in such films as The Case of the Bloody Iris, or what was the satanic one, the Sergio Martino one, All the Colors of the... No, it's not All the Colors of the Dark. Yes, it is All the Colors of the Dark. The one where Ivan Rasimov wears those blue contact lenses. So, in the same vein, Mimsy Farmer's character has quite powerful visions in Autopsy. So she works somewhat unusually, in a morgue. So she's this very good-looking and fragile young lady, and she performs autopsies. At the beginning of the film is I think it's a very strong start. Autopsies really doesn't shy away from some graphic images early on in the film, and it's a powerful hook which also sets the tone for the story. The story itself is a bit of a conventional murder mystery at its core, but on the outside, Armando Crispino just gives it such unusual packaging that the film is a real standout. So Simone is this pathologist, and she sees cadavers come to life, and this scene, this early hallucination scene, it was shot at a real obitorio. It's a real morgue just outside this huge, massive, monumental cemetery in Rome. And this early scene might result in the viewer perceiving Autopsy as some kind of a horror film, because there are quite grotesque images. There is that focus on nude corpses, obviously lying there stitched up on slabs, and there is that unflinching look at death and what happens after death, which sets Autopsy apart from some of the more glamorized gialli, where we see murders and bloodshed in a more comic bookish style or more aestheticized style. So Autopsy is quite a grim and oppressive film, both in its ambience, in this overheated Rome boiling in August, with deserted streets, with just poor tourists being sort of shepherded from one church to another, from one sightseeing location to another. So the city appears not terribly attractive. Autopsy paints a picture of city life as quite not only challenging but also dangerous and full of nasty surprises. Which Autopsy is one of those films which have grown on me a lot, and I'll try and bring up some of the factors which I think contribute to my growing love for this film. There is fantastic editing in this film. The early montage in the movie, the film starts with the opening credit sequences. There's a series of quite grotesque and violent suicides occurring all over Rome, which are being attributed to unusual sun activity, the sunspots. The Italian original title was Macchie Solari, sunspots. So there is the theory that the suicides might be attributed to those solar incidents there. And we see that footage, that stock footage of sunspots that are shot through the telescope, which also shows up, I think the same shots you can see in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and that movie where the guy falls apart, The Incredible Melting Man. I think it's the same footage in both of those films, so that's an interesting movie connection. We get back to Simone, the central character. She has that vision of those corpses in the morgue suddenly getting up and getting it on with each other and screaming and freaking out, and that's quite an unusual way to open your thriller. Throughout the film, there are several instances where director Crispino shows either explicit sexual images as flash frames or photographs of decomposed bodies. So there is a lot of that photographic, and so there is a visual aspect of the film where the film camera films a two-dimensional canvas. For example, Simone's boyfriend, played by Ray Lovelock, who you might remember from Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, or he was in The Flying Squad with Thomas Millian. So he plays this quite annoying car racing photographer, sort of easy living, good looking boyfriend of Simone's. And it's an interesting, curious pairing of this spoiled rich kid who's dating this good looking but disturbed morgue pathologist, right? So that's one of those fascinating aspects which you don't see in more straight-laced conventional thrillers. And the relationships Simone has in the film with male characters are very nicely outlined, and this is one of the reasons why, in my opinion, Autopsy has aged better than many other gialli. I think Autopsy and Deep Red, which, like I mentioned, came up just a few months apart, both show like more progressive approach to gender politics, and they are great examples of a thriller which is somewhat less antiquated, because it confronts some of the issues which are very pertinent today in the 21st century. So this kind of sexual dysfunction is addressed in Autopsy, a number of times, and that theme gets a little bit of an exploration, and not necessarily just as an excuse to get some nudity into the film. I gotta say, the love scenes, the sex scenes in Autopsy, they are intrinsic to the plot, and to we're shown Simone's development, her progressive sort of she kind of falls into this paranoia / hysteria, and it's important to show that her sexual hang-ups are part of that, because she has that odd, well, let's say not odd, but let's say somewhat unconventional fixation on her father, who's played by this prolific Italian actor Massimo Serrato, who you might remember from Bloodstained Shadow. He was with Mastroianni in The 10th Victim. He's been in a bunch of films. He's worked with Margheriti, and he has a decent filmography. So Massimo Serrato plays this character called Gianni Sanna. He's Simone's father, and the interesting thing is they live in this condominium, and he lives upstairs on the top floor. And she's just below him, so she sees all the young girls about her age parading up and down the stairs. So her father, this gray-haired Italian sort of gentleman, this kind of slightly sleazy type, he's dating all these younger women, Americans. So Simone is Italian-American, so her father is called Gianni. He's like Italian, and he likes to date Americans, apparently. It's interesting that then another father enters the picture, and it's a father in terms of, like, it's a Catholic priest. And it's a car racing Catholic priest who has fits, who goes into, like, epileptic seizures. So there is another car racing character with another twisted, with a background. So all characters have, they're struggling, and none of them are really happy. So Autopsy is interesting in that it's a film that tackles some very unusual complex issues without being too grim and without being too boring about it. So it's a good mixture there between some grittiness, and yet it's a very stylish film, and it moves along at a very decent pace. The movie is about 1 hour 40 minutes long, about 100 minutes long, I guess, and might be 2 or 3 minutes over long, but for 1974, 1975, it's quite a fast-paced movie. Acting. When we speak of acting, Mimsy Farmer, hands down, I think this might be my favorite performance of hers in an Italian movie I've seen so far. I loved her in More, but that's not an Italian genre film. So I think Mimsy Farmer was married to an Italian at the time. This is how she ended up landing so many roles in Italy in the 70s. She was also, like, in Fulci's Black Cat. But this role as Simone, it's a more interesting character. It's a more diverse character. There is another film starring Mimsy Farmer I reviewed a few weeks back, that was Perfume of the Lady in Black, which is a Barilli thriller, giallo horror. It's a very odd art horror film, which some classify as giallo. I wouldn't go as far, but there is that similar fragile sort of victim character, but in Autopsy, Mimsy Farmer also her character has a feisty side, so she can stand up for herself. There are some lecherous characters she confronts, some sleazy, macho, creepy guys. One of them is played by Ernesto Colli, who you might remember from such movies as Porno Shop on 42nd Street. What was the name? A Joe D'Amato film. He was also in Sergio Martino's Tossos. He has that very memorable face and physique. He's perfect for playing kind of lecherous creeps. So Ernesto Colli plays this morgue attendant who's has the hots for her character, and she and Simone actually confronts him, and then there is that. So there is one episode in Autopsy which reminded me of Bird with Crystal Plumage. So we have Simone, she enters the staircase. She enters her condominium, her block of flats, and she wants to take the lift, the elevator, but that's out. So she takes the stairs, and that's when the lights go out, and then she snaps on her little lighter, and that's like a build-up almost identical from description to one of the slashing scenes in Bird with Crystal Plumage, but it culminates quite differently in Autopsy. And generally, although there are some, definitely some Argento touches here and there, I would say Crispino has really managed to hold his own and make definitely a very personal movie there within the constraints of a murder mystery. For Autopsy is not as much a suspense movie as it is a traditional murder mystery, very much influenced by Agatha Christie. There is actually the murder motive when it comes out. It's I don't think it was ever really used by Argento, who likes to motivate his killers through like a childhood trauma. Now, in this case, it's something a little bit more mercantile, and like I said, it made me think of Golden Age murder mysteries. But the way Crispino really, the way he embellishes it, it makes it into something very, very dark and special. So it's there is not that much attempt at suspense, but the film holds your attention through its style, and pacing is snappy, and there is always something happening. I would like to take a minute to praise the visuals in Autopsy. The cinematographer, I think, is the DOP's Carlo Carlini, and the film has a very, very distinct look. First of all, they don't use a scope, so it's a movie made in a smaller format, so it's not like a panoramic view. So the framing is affected by that immediately, and the film's appearance, especially back in the DVD incarnation, was quite bleached out and quite the colors looked sort of subdued, and this recent HD upgrade has obviously punched up the colors, because I think they might have gone back to the negative. So there is more saturation, there is definitely more color depth, but the film still has that quite it's as if it was bleached by the sun, because there are lots of shots also in the movie where the camera directly zooms. There are hypnotic, beautiful insert shots where we zoom in directly into the sun, and there is a lot of play also with kind of sun kind of diffractions and reflections within the camera lens. So very much a stylized approach to the film, but with also great fixation on death, and how dead bodies are visually, how they're captured in black and white grainy images, and also there are those morgue interludes. David Brendan and Mimsy Farmer live in Four Flies and Grey Velvet, and the same interior you've also seen in Bazzoni's film The Fifth Chord. That was Franco Nero's partner's house. So it's actually like a villa in Rome, but they use it as a top floor flat interior in The Victim. So that was curious. I really like, the more you watch these films, the more those little incidental, they are superficial, but they're curious little connections there, the more they pop up. I guess it's, and when it comes to the violence, I think Autopsy really has again a very particular approach. We don't really have so much point of view shots from the killer, so we don't have those long prowling shots. The point of view shots are more of the victim's perspective here, and there are generally no traditional giallo set pieces with like a masked killer stalking somebody. It's not that kind of a film. So violence, the way it's shown, it's really, there is no celebration of it whatsoever. It's also quite grisly. So there is the theme of suicide running through the whole story. So there is even this museum, very, very, it's an unforgettable scene. There is Simone being locked up in this museum. She's wandering around that those recreations of famous suicides, I guess, those dummies, and then there is like one of the dummies which is rigged with a loaded gun, so she's supposed to fall into this trap and have her head blown off. So that's a really interesting scene, how she almost gets shot in that scene. The whole aspect of investigation is very nicely developed. I mean, I always, when I judge a murder mystery or a thriller, I look at it from that point of view. Besides being stylish, besides being well scored, because they all have great scores, do they actually investigate? or is it more like just set pieces galore? So in Autopsy, there is quite a good deal of investigation, and police is very much in the background because we're investigating a suicide. The two characters, the priest and Simone, they both suspect that the suicide was staged, that was actually murder, but the police never learn of that. And by the time the killer is unraveled, it's too late for the police. So police is really pretty much in the background. I appreciate that very much, because the bumbling policeman, we've had enough of that, and boring police procedural scenes. There is plenty of them in other Jolly. So when it comes to the killer revelation, first of all, I didn't guess who it was, but neither did I care. The first time I was watching Autopsy, I was so overwhelmed by the visual grandeur, by the pulsating, strange, also music from Morricone. I just didn't, I was completely just in the, in the experience. But now looking at it after several viewings with a bit more detachment and more appreciation, I really like the fact that the way the killer is revealed, he's first revealed to us, the viewer, and so we know who the killer is, and that helps create extra suspense in the finale, because we kind of see the characters walk into the killer's trap, so we're on their side. So that's a nice move there, and it also saves the killer his final monologue. That's when the killer has to list his motives and explain very quickly all the confusing things that kept mounting up. In a good murder mystery, there is a long explanation. If you read those murder mysteries, sometimes the explanation pages, if it's usually the sleuth, like somebody like Poirot, explaining this, can take like 12-14 pages in a novel. So imagine in a movie, they have to compress it into a hysterical monologue. I think the killer's hysterical monologues in such films as Four Flies on Grey Velvet are, for example, really where the film becomes a little bit... or even if you think of Psycho, Hitchcock's Psycho, there is also that explanation at the end, which it's inevitable. It has to tie things up, but the directors obviously struggle with making it cinematic because it's just a long list of explanations. So that's tackled quite well, because the killer kind of is revealed to us, to the viewer, and so we are spared that unconvincing scene where the killer has the investigator at gunpoint and has to tell them everything without shooting them, before shooting them. So those unrealistic scenes are cleverly avoided in this script. I generally thought very well of the script and the dialogue. I thought also the English dubbing was pretty decent in Autopsy. Some Jolly have dreadful dubs, the worst offender being, in my opinion, a later slasher Giallo movie, A Blade in the Dark. That's like the worst English dub I can think of in a Giallo off the top of my head. But here in Autopsy, I love both the Italian track and the English track. I think they're pretty damn good. A murder mystery, you could call it a puzzle, yeah? So there is an interesting scene early on in the film where the morgue attendant, played by Ernesto Colli, he has this gunshot suicide victim on the slab in front of him, and he's making her up with mortician's wax and things like that, and he's rebuilding her face, basically reshaping her face after the devastating gunshot wound, and eventually Simone recognizes that person as her father's girlfriend. And the way they shot that, it kind of is a puzzle. He's putting together like a human puzzle, rebuilding that face, and I loved that. I absolutely loved that moment. And several times throughout Autopsy, I thought the story, it's well constructed, but it has obviously the weak spots like every murder mystery, where it's a bit mechanical, where the red herrings are really piled on fast and thick, so you're thinking, okay, this is so ridiculous. Also, the characters' background are so absurdly, their traumas are a bit, so there is no pretense at deep realism here. To hell with realism. It's an entertaining commercial movie. So when it comes to surprises, I thought the finale was extremely good, and it wasn't as clear where the good guy is going to win or not, because the preceding film was so quite sweaty and downbeat. I wouldn't have put it past them to have had a really grim ending, the way some of those scenes were working out. It was building up to something quite horrific. So I was really quite riveted there, and it's an unusual example. I think that's the only movie I know, Autopsy, where a bidet is used to save the characters' lives. I don't want to give away too much without for those of you who haven't watched Autopsy yet. What can I say? It's obviously a great film. I want to recommend it highly. I've pointed out the great visuals, a well tight constructed plot. Autopsy is one of my preferred non-Argento gialli. It's up there with Umberto Lenzi's Spasmos, one of my favorite Italian thrillers of that decade. It's not as light-hearted as the Martino gialli, and it has it packs quite a punch, and it focuses a lot on what physical death looks like, and for a film that's vintage, it's quite graphic and has some quite stylish passages. So when it came to the conclusion, I thought that the very final scene, the use of slow motion, was really poetic, and it really came together so well with Morricone's lyrical and haunting music. I really gotta say, Autopsy is one of the more overlooked gialli out there, and I can see myself revisiting it many more times. So these are my thoughts on Armando Crispino's giallo Autopsy. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why don't you tell your friends about it? Don't forget to hit the like button and perhaps consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thanks.